All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Mike Lee. He is a performance coach, author, speaker. Today he's going to talk to us about all kinds of mindfulness and uplifting stuff. So, Mike, do me a favor, please tell us a little bit about yourself and that journey to, because you started in basketball leadership, right? So tell us a little bit about that journey to basketball.
It really started with a summer basketball camp that I wanted to run in my hometown with a buddy of mine. We just wanted to do it during the summer when we were both in college. And the first year we had about 100 kids that showed up. The second year we were at 200. And by year 3, we had 300 kids that showed up in a super, super small town in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. And instead of going into college basketball coaching, which is what I thought that I wanted to do, I decided to build this essentially a basketball training business. So essentially you think summer camps for kids, but at an elite level. And that evolved into a training facility and running events, running camps pretty much across the world for about 15 years before I transitioned into speaking and coaching, more so on the mental performance side of the game, not on the side of the game, but mental performance side of life and business and leadership and performance in all arenas, not just on the basketball court. So I was doing that for 15 years and then transitioned into the speaking and coaching side of it.
So silly question, did you play basketball? Was that part of that passion?
Yeah, that was definitely a piece of it. I mean, I fell in love with Michael Jordan and Jalen Rose and the Fab Five when I was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and that's really where it started. And yeah, I played all through high school, all through college, and then I was coaching my last year in college while I was building this program and finishing up school. And that's where everything was kind of born out of that last year.
So something strikes me, and I'm going to veer away from some of the things I was thinking in my head before we started talking, but you kind of started this before it became really trendy to kind of be an entrepreneur, right? So you were a little younger. What kind of gave you that motivation that, or even gave you the thought that you could even accomplish something like that? How did that happen?
That's such a great question because you're right. It's like now it is trendy to be an entrepreneur. It's cool. Part of the reason is because it's so much easier. Barrier to entry is virtually nothing if you want to start your own business. So it was really, I'm trying to figure out how to answer that question in a succinct way, but it was, I guess your question is why did I just decide to do it? And it was just, I was working summer basketball camps all summer long. When I was in college, I would drive all around the country from Wisconsin out to you know where Hansdale, Pennsylvania is, right outside New York City. They have a huge campus called 5 Stars, the original basketball camp. I used to go all around the country working these camps during the summer, and I learned a lot, and I was around some great coaches. But I just thought to myself, I was like, I can do this just as good, if not better, than what these what they're doing. And I can do it in a different way. And I just decided to build it. I decided to start with a couple camps, and we had these club basketball programs, and it just kind of grew. I mean, I think I didn't know this at the time, but looking back, one thing that I realized was that everything that I've done in my life up to this point has been about solving one of my own, combining a passion of mine and a pain point, solving that pain point, and then using something that I'm passionate about to teach others to help them overcome challenges that I've had to overcome, or maybe I tried to overcome and I was trying to figure out every single reason why I was not successful. And so I was able to take all those things and teach the players that I was working with. I never came close to becoming the player that I had hoped that I could be, but I learned a ton along the way through so much failure and I hate using the word failure because I feel like failure implies that something's permanent. but I learned so much through the process of trying to become the best player that I could be. And I was able to take that and teach other kids how to fulfill these passions that they had. So my big thing really was at the time in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is very, I guess you can kind of think of it as like kind of New York if you got rid of Syracuse and Albany and Rochester, right? There's basically Milwaukee and Madison, which is in the corner. And like New York City is basically in the corner of New York, right? And there's nothing else in the state really, right? So if you're a kid who's in upstate New York or northern Wisconsin and wants to play on an elite level basketball program, you had to drive 3, 4, 5 hours just to get to a practice. And so I give these kids an opportunity who had a passion for the game in these really small towns. And it's really what happened. There was, we had kids that went on to play in Final Four in the NCAA tournament. We got a kid right now who's playing for the Toronto Raptors. And we ended up working with dozens of guys that played in the NBA. And it really stemmed from the fact that I wanted to give these kids from these super small towns who had limited access and resources, the skills, the opportunities to have a chance to have these dreams come to life that they had when they were 5th, 6th, 7th grade.
So it seems like I don't want to say you solved the problem, but you experienced enough of the problem to share that information. Like how much of an impact does that really have on them when you're sharing those? I went through this too. Here's the problems. Are you predicting it for them when you see those same problems occurring for them as young athletes?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is providing them an experience. Like I've really learned that knowledge and theory only take you so far, right? You have to get, especially today, and with that generation, the millennial generation, Gen Z, like they have an incredible BS radar. So you have to, right? I'm sure you've experienced this a little bit with the kid that you were just talking about, right? So you have to provide them an experience so that they don't believe something, they know something. It's not, oh, I believe this, or I think that this could happen, or think that this could help me. It's an inner knowing through an experience that creates that level of certainty, that level of belief that you can actually help somebody. So that's what really we're about.
Wow, you just took me somewhere totally different, and I'm not going to go there, but it must be really hard for younger people to grasp religion, right? Because you actually have to believe in something that you don't have any proof of. I mean, that must be really a concept to tackle, but I'm not going to go there, but I just thought of that.
That's another show.
Yeah, that's definitely another.
That's a whole different conversation, but I am going to make note of that.
Let's talk about that, right? Because you went through these things, you experienced some of these problems. So how did you transition it from, okay, I experienced this, I know the solution, to them having to experience that same thing to know, versus you saying, hey, if you do this, it's going to get better, or you're going to get better at this, or it's not going to always last. You're having a bad day. How do you give them the experience so they actually know, versus sort of just trying to pass on, the information?
Yeah, 100%. I think the number one thing that I was able to do that gave me a chance to build this business, because there were other guys that were doing it for sure, but they played Division I basketball, or they were former NBA players, or they had major name credibility, at least within, maybe not on a national level, but at least within their community, right? Like, if you go on to play college basketball at any level, in most communities, you have name recognition. I mean, the stat is, I think 2.7% of all high school basketball players go on to play college basketball at any level. That means they might play 1 year of junior college basketball. That's basically glorified high school basketball, right? So that in that 2.7%, that counts, right? So if you played at a real school, you had some credibility. And I played at a small Division III school. I didn't have name recognition. And so what I had to do is I had to demonstrate. I had to be able to demonstrate every single skill, every single drill, every single move that I was trying to teach out on the court, because that's how I was able to get buy-in. And I think you're talking to somebody in a leadership position, right? actions that you demonstrate, the behaviors that you model are the number one thing that you can do as a leader in order to create impact. Right? That's why we hear be an example, or why you should be a role model, or like Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. Right? It all starts with leading yourself first and demonstrating that in order to get people to buy in. And then it's the second piece is really just getting them to try it, getting them, they see you do it, and then getting them to try it and getting them to focus on that process. And then they're going to see if no matter what you're teaching, right? If you can get them to see a little bit of success, a little bit of progress, maybe they're not doing it at 100%, which never is, but right, they're not doing it at 100%. They can see a little bit of success. That success builds, you have enjoyment with that success. And I'm going on a whole different thing right now. I'm talking about practicing in the sweet spot, which is basically getting people to practice in that space that's just outside your comfort zone, where you're having some success, but it's not so easy that you're bored. And it's not so difficult that you're not having any success at all and you're making mistakes every single time. It's basically putting people in that position. That's really the second step, is putting them in that position where they're in the sweet spot, where they're able to have some success. And from that success, with the process comes enjoyment. With that enjoyment comes momentum. And with momentum, that's where you can start to build real skills. So modeling it and then putting them into a sweet spot where they can get intentional, effective, deliberate practice.
So I want to reference your book a little bit. So Untrained, in that book, you focus a lot on mindfulness. Now, was that part of the focus when you first started this, or did that kind of evolve as you were working with people and teaching? And where did that come from?
That's a story. Well, to go back to your original question, did it start with basketball? No, it didn't. But we always had an emphasis on the mind. We always believed that if you want to maximize your potential, and this really is across all industries, all arenas, anything you want to do, you have to you can't just maximize your skills, right? Like in the basketball space, up until the early 1990s, nobody lifted weights. Nobody worked on their body. Everybody thought that it was gonna mess up your shot. It was going to bulk you up too much so that you couldn't move. You didn't have mobility. So nobody lifted weights. And then a guy by the name of Michael Jordan started to lift. And because he did something that nobody else was doing at the time, he got an edge for quite a while because nobody else was willing to do it. Now, in the basketball space, working on your body is the required price of admission to be able to compete at a high level. Now, so going back to what I was talking about earlier, we always believed that you had to work on your mind, your body, and your skills if you're going to maximize your potential. You could be great, but you might be better than most, but you're not going to. Our whole thing was, who cares if you're better than most if you're not maximizing every ounce of potential that's within you? So we knew that the mental aspect of the game was important. So we definitely talked about things like mindset and focusing on the process and different things that mindfulness enhances. And so what happened was, I used to live in Wisconsin, as I talked about earlier, I think. I used to live in Wisconsin, used to live in Milwaukee, and I used to get incredibly depressed during the winters in Wisconsin. And it just got to a point where I said, I can't do another winter here. I need to be because one thing that I knew was that sunlight was a factor in the depression, because obviously it got way worse during the winters. So it just got to a point during the fall of 2014 where I decided that I was not going to do another winter in Wisconsin, and I just basically picked up and moved out to LA. I moved here purely for the weather. And I got here and it was January, it was sunny out and I was feeling great, and I decided to get off this antidepressant medication that I've been on for the past 14 years. And getting off of it was like getting off of heroin. It threw my body into a state of chronic emotional instability. I would go from laughing to crying to anxiety to depression all within a couple hours. And so every day I felt like I was going to war in my mind. There was this battleground that had been created because of the instability of the withdrawals from this medication. And at the time, I'd been practicing yoga for about a year just to cope with normal stress in my life. And at that time, I decided if I'm going to get off this medication, which I wanted to because I was doing more research on certain pharmaceutical medications, and the one that I was taking was causing crazy birth defects in children whose mothers were taking them as well. They were pregnant. These kids were being born without arms and without legs and these other crazy birth defects directly tied to the same antidepressant medication that I was on. So I knew I wanted to get off of it because I was like, what is this doing to my body? I've been on this stuff for 14 years. I have no idea what this is really doing to my body long term, my body and my mind. And so and getting off of it, I knew that I needed something. I needed a tool to help me win this battleground that I felt like I was in every single day in my mind. And that's when I committed to a mindfulness meditation practice. So tying this back to the basketball stuff, I realized after a couple months of practice that all the skills that I had been teaching in the basketball space, from a mental performance side of the game, and even just the leadership skills that I was using to run my little basketball company. We had 6 or 7 employees at the time. They were all elevated. Everything was elevated, from focus to self-awareness to your ability to develop relationships and just simply be more present in the moment. Every single skill was elevated when you had a mindfulness practice, because when you have a consistent practice, there's areas of your brain that physically change. Right? There's an area in the front called the neocortex, which is responsible for your things like your self-awareness, your executive function, your decision-making. That area in your brain actually grows and gets slightly bigger. There's an area at the base of your brain called the amygdala, which is responsible for your fight, flight, or freeze response. That area actually shrinks, making you less reactive to stress. And so when we're less reactive to stress, we're more present in the moment, focused on the task at hand. So I realized that all these principles that I've been teaching were all elevated by a mindfulness meditation practice. And that's where the concept of the book came from. It wasn't a book specifically on how to implement a mindfulness practice. It was more so about, hey, if you want to dive into this, here are stories, here are examples, here are some exercises and mindsets that you can adopt that will be significantly amplified if you have a mindfulness practice.
So two things, right? I'm a true believer. I'm a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, right? So, I'm a true believer, like physical activity makes you like more complete, like it keeps me balanced, right? Especially for myself. Now you mentioned like mindfulness. Now with those mindfulness practices, it seems like that would help you when you show up to make sure you're there, right? To make sure you're in that present moment, if you're very mindful of the situation by, that meditating. So when you're there, you're going to get into that zone, correct? Do the two have a correlation?
Is the question, does having a mindfulness practice help you be more in the moment and be more present? Is that what you're...
Correct.
Yeah. And I think, there's two parts of it, right? There's training your mind to just be in that. I believe that our natural state is one of presence. It's the 2 million year old brain that we are operating in, that's constantly scanning our environment for fear, or not for fear, but for threats in our environment. That is what pulls us out of our natural state. Mm-hmm. I think our natural state is just one of complete presence, right? So 2 parts to it. Does it train your mind to just be in that state more often? Yes, 100%. But I think actually what's more powerful about it is we live in a world of disruption, of distractions, and of rapid change. And so we are constantly being pulled out of the present moment. Mm-hmm. But when we can create awareness of the fact that our attention has drifted, we have moved off the task at hand, our mind has drifted from the conversation that we're having to the meeting that's coming up next, or what we got to make for dinner, or the fact that we have, got to get to our kids' activity after school, 12 months from now. we can create awareness and then bring our attention back into the moment with that awareness. So it's not so much about locking in on every single thing that we do. It's about creating the awareness of when our attention's drifted, to be able to use that awareness to bring our attention back to the moment. When we bring our attention back to the moment, we bring our energy and our focus back to the moment.
Gotcha.
So then, do you think mindfulness is becoming a buzzword, or do you really feel, I don't know, everybody talks about mindfulness. I mean, we've had how many people on the show so far? Everybody's talking about mindfulness. Is it just another buzzword, or are we really starting to put this into action? Are people really starting to kind of evolve and think more about like being present?
I definitely think that I think it's happening, and I think it's happening out of sheer necessity, honestly. You know, like I just talked about before, we've never lived in an era of the human race where things have been more disruptive, more they don't change as rapidly as we are right now. And all of that is just constantly putting stressors on our nervous system, putting stressors on our brain. And I think a lot of us are feeling confused, or we're, especially with everything going on with COVID, right? We're feeling confused, we're feeling lost, we're feeling pressure, we're feeling stress, we're feeling all these things we've never felt before. And mindfulness is a tool that I think for a lot of people can be super beneficial in order to combat this world of distractions that we are living in. And I think I think it's come out of necessity. And I think the internet and just social and technology has allowed it to spread at a pace that it never would have in the past. I think the other piece of it is that, mindfulness was derived from Buddhism, right? But there's been a lot of teachers that have been able to strip out the spiritual aspects of it in order to make it more accessible. So whether you're atheist, whether you're Catholic, whether you're whatever you are, whatever you identify with, you can implement a practice without feeling like it's infringing on your spiritual beliefs, right? So, like for example, I'm going in a couple of weeks to run an event for an entire school district, a leadership event for an entire school district, and they are from the Lutheran religion, right? But they know that I'm coming in to talk about mindfulness. Mm-hmm. So it's something that because people have been able to make it practical, and science has backed it up. Science has been able to back up what practitioners have known for thousands of years. Science is almost the unifying language, right? It's the unifying language of communication for people who are coming from various backgrounds. Like the science doesn't lie, the data doesn't lie.
I think one of the biggest things that I'm taking away that Mike's talking about that's different than some of the other people that have talked about mindfulness is, Mike, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, right? But you're saying also the mindfulness helps you bring you back to that present situation where you could be mindful and not be in the present situation, I think. And I think what Mike's saying is it helps bring you back to that current, your present situation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the main benefit of it, right? I mean, the bottom line is like most of us live our lives in the future or the past. We're in the future in planning and worry, anxiety, fear, whatever it is, or we're in the past in regret, guilt, shame, anger, frustration. And the only place that we can take any action or even find any fulfillment in our lives is in the present moment. Mm-hmm. And so using mindfulness as a tool to access the present moment, the only place where life actually happens, is incredibly powerful in so many different ways.
Right. Here, I'll explain, like from my rationale, Nicola, because I see your face right there. But from my rationale, like
about being in the present moment. I mean, all mindfulness, because even when, I've taken meditation classes and all this stuff that I can't possibly do because I'm never here. So, they're always like, if your mind wanders, bring it back. It's okay to wander. So it's kind of like the same thing, though.
I would say I'm gonna put it in relation for me, right? The two things I do, jujitsu and running, right? Jujitsu, I can't think about anything but what's sort of going on because someone will, literally beat the crap out of me or choke me or, right? And running, I could let my mind wander and think about my problem. So I'm not really mindful to what's going on in my present. I'm sort of thinking about stuff. And where in jujitsu, I'm very mindful of what I'm actually doing, showing up to compete or whatever the case is. I mean, to me, that's how and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's how you're sort of looking at it, but that's how I'm sort of looking at from what Mike is saying to us.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and I think really what we're talking about from a high level is what can we do to access the present moment, right? And so I think that I 100% do not believe that mindfulness is the only way to do that, or that meditate. And some people, people are doing it without even having that intention, right? It's super simple example. I dated a girl a few years ago, and I tried to, this was when I was really getting into meditation. I was like, oh, everybody has to do this. And it's like the preachy vegans when they first go vegan. But she was a runner, and she would run for, she would run 5, 6, 7, 8 miles with no music. It was just her alone in her thoughts, and she would be running. She was one of the most self-aware people that I've ever met in my life. Mm-hmm. And I think because she kind of ran with that intention. She ran with a mindful intention, right? She didn't sit down. She would sit down and meditate once in a while, but it wasn't a big part of her life. But I think you can use tools like running to create that state of mind and that awareness. And obviously, another example, super obvious, is a yoga practice. If you're doing it with the right teachers, it's not fitness yoga; it's real yoga, right? So I think a lot of it is setting the intention that that's how I want to show up. I want to show up more aware, and then finding an activity that creates that for you, right? Like, you talk about doing jujitsu, like you're literally, you are through that practice, you are training your mind to be more present. Mm-hmm. You have to be locked in, right? So I think it's about the intention, and then finding a modality that works for you. What I don't think works is when people are just like, oh, I just set an intention and then I try to be more mindful. I don't that
yeah.
You can just set that intention and then try to do that, show up that way the rest of your day without doing something to specifically train that state of mind, right? There's, like we talked about before, there's science behind it. There's also science behind exercise, right? And how it shifts our brain states, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is about just finding what modality works for you.
So then let me ask you a question. I mean, another thing that's, really linked to this is emotional intelligence. And, what is that connection then? Because emotional intelligence is another one of those, I'll call them buzzwords, but it's something that we're becoming more aware of. And it's something that people are really starting to use as kind of what's the word I'm looking for, Brian? Like whether or not you're skilled, like emotional intelligence is actually high up on a lot of hiring managers' lists of skills that people should have, So we are becoming more aware of that. What's the link then between mindfulness and emotional intelligence?
Well, that's a good question. And I think this is something that gets confused. And I think, honestly, we were having this discussion about, Brian, you were talking about what your interpretation of mindfulness was, and mm-hmm. it was a little different. And I think this is where some of the confusion comes from, is we use some of these terms interchangeably. And so the way I like to define it, and I could define these in way deeper terms if I wanted to go into it, but to define it for context, I define mindfulness as the skill or the ability to create the awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions in the present moment. Emotional intelligence is figuring out the second layer of that. That's what figuring out what's driving my thoughts, what's driving my feelings, what's driving my actions. And meditation is simply an exercise to create that level of awareness. So I use those three to kind of define it for people so that they understand it. Because lots of people, one of the challenges is so many people are using the word mindfulness to describe essentially what is the realm of mental performance. Anything that has to do with the mind, they call it mindfulness, right? It's not what it is. It's really that awareness piece. I think another definition of it is John Kabat-Zinn has a definition of it, and it's a non-judgmental present awareness of, I don't know exactly what he do, but there's other definitions, and it really comes back to the awareness of the present moment. And I think unless you have that, where this relates is, unless you first have that awareness, you can't be emotionally intelligent. You can't have a high EQ because you don't have the awareness of what's driving anything in your life, and you allow your life to be driven by emotions instead of driven by intention and by values.
I get it. All right, so then we like to leave people with some sort of actionable advice. And I think you probably have something good up your sleeve then. So if we're looking at mindfulness, emotional intelligence, meditation, what can you tell, if someone wants to kind of transform in any way, whether it be in business, sports, whatever it is, what can they start doing right now to get that process rolling?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the first part of it is, it's funny because this question comes up a lot when I come on podcasts, right? And I think the number one thing is you have to figure out your why, right? So many, when you ask a question, it's like nobody changes for the sake of change. They either change because they're pushed by pain or they're pulled by a vision of a future that's greater than their circumstances. So they have to figure out that why. Number one, they have to get to clarity. They have to create that vision of what they want to create. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to create a strategy. All right. Now, how am I going to get to the vision? How am I going to bring this to life? How am I going to create what I can see in my mind? How am I going to actually make this manifest? So that's the second thing, is get to that strategy or the process. The third thing is you have to find somebody to model, somebody who has created what you're trying to create, that's built the business that you want to build, that's become the leader that you want to become, that has become the parent that you want to become, the coach you want to become, whatever it is. In some way, shape, or form, somebody has done already what you're trying to do. And then you can build upon that. You can bring in your own experiences, your own unique skills to that vision that you're trying to create, but somebody else has done it in some way, shape, or form. You want to build a business in a certain arena, somebody else has done it, and you can figure out how they've done it and then model the behaviors to create shortcuts for your learning experience. The fourth thing is to find a master teacher, right? Find somebody, a mentor, a coach. The greatest performers in all arenas of life all have coaches, right? Kobe Bryant had his coach on the team, right? He had Phil Jackson, that was his coach for his team, but then he also had other coaches. He had a personal basketball training coach. He had a meditation coach. He had other people that helped him level up other areas of his life that were all supporting his basketball performance. So you got to find a master teacher. Even people like Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins also has mentors. He has coaches that are still coaching him today. Even he's probably one of the highest performing people on the planet, right? So everybody's got coaches to keep them accountable, to give them that outside opinion, that other objective. So I think those four things are a great start for anybody who's looking to create a change in their life or to build something new. And I'll just recap them real quick. Number one, get to clarity or to find a vision. Really, it's about, now that I'm saying this out loud, it's about getting clarity with your vision. We all have a vision, some way, shape, or form, conscious or subconscious, but is it clear about what you really want to build in your life, create in your life. So get to clarity, get to a vision. Second thing is strategy or a process. Third thing is find somebody to model. And the fourth thing is find a master teacher.
Those are awesome. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. That was some actionable advice. Thank you so much for that. And I know we talked a lot about mindfulness. There were so many other things I wanted to bring up, but please let everybody know where they can learn more about you and your book, your speaking engagements, whatever you've got going on. Please tell us where we can learn more.
Yeah, the best place really is to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at whoismikelee. You can also drop me an email, mike@mindshiftlabs.com. Really, the big things I'm focusing on right now are virtual speaking engagements and workshops around resilience, leadership, and performance, and then also doing individual coaching on the same topics. So I'd be more than happy to jump on a call and discuss anything that anybody has in mind, or it's just something they want to share, something that they need help with in this moment. I know we're all going through a lot right now, and I just want to be here to serve and to be of help to people that are going through challenges right now. We're all going through a lot, and but if you think that I can help you out in any way, shape, or form, don't hesitate to reach out.
Mike, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.